All right. Good afternoon, everybody. The International Parking and Mobility Institute presents today's Shop Talk, The Leading Edge, Response, Reopening, and Recovering for Parking, Transportation, and the Mobility Industry. My name is Justin Grunert, and I'll be assisting Gary Means, CAPP, in moderating today's Shop Talk. As a reminder, today's Shop Talk is being recorded. We will make the recording available online, and we'll post it to IPMI's YouTube channel. Before I turn it over to Gary, I would like to go over a few quick housekeeping rules for today. If you have a webcam and you're comfortable doing so, please turn on your camera. IPMI wants everyone to feel engaged and participate, and we want to see your smiling faces. We want this virtual Shop Talk to be just like a regular Shop Talk, face-to-face and sharing ideas. As a reminder, all participants' lines are muted. We invite everyone to participate. To do so, we ask everyone to please use your raise your hand feature. For online participants, please click on the participants icon in the Zoom control menu. A separate window will pop up. The raise your hand feature will be at the bottom of the participants menu. You can click the raise your hand, but we will recognize you and then we will unmute your line. For phone participants, you can press *9 to raise your hand and then *6 to unmute your line once recognized. Your microphone will be unmuted and allowed to join the conversation. We ask that you please say your name and the organization you work for so that way everyone knows who you are. You may also type your question into the chat. Click the chat icon and then type your question or comment and click send. I will read these again later in the group. And now I'm going to turn the audience over to Gary Means.
Thanks a lot, Justin. Hey, I'm honored to kind of try to moderate this and direct traffic a little bit. And my goal is to see if we can get as much information out in this hour time. And so by doing that, I'm going to try to keep it moving. I encourage you to use the chat. And if you see somebody that you think relates to something that you're interested in, or they answer a question or ask a question, feel free to use the private chat and get a conversation going, meet somebody new maybe. It's great to see a lot of familiar faces, and let's just get started. And I want to try to, in the past, IPMI has rolled out several of these shop talks, and they've kind of stayed in certain industry verticals. And so we've mixed everybody together this time. So we're going to talk a little university. We're going to talk with some consultants and suppliers, vendors, a little municipality. And you're going to have to watch me because I'll always lean towards what I do, but I'm going to try to keep it mixed up and get everybody a chance to get involved, or at least let us hear from different sectors and what's going on. So let me throw out a few things so you maybe can be thinking or thinking about an answer or thinking about a question. But I think some of the things that I'm seeing going on in some of the questions that came in earlier or on LinkedIn and some other groups and talks that we've been on in the past, and friends, some things like in the university world, I'd like to hear from a few of the university folks on thinking about the semester, this coming fall semester. Is there any that are just not going to meet in person at all? I'm hearing a lot of them are saying a condensed, coming a little early and then getting finished at Thanksgiving and maybe doing online finals. That's what the University of Kentucky is going to do. Or are you just doing it normal? And from university folks, love to know that. You can either answer in chat or let's raise your hand if you've got something to share. But we also, people are interested in what people are doing with shuttles and buses in terms of cleanliness protocol and keeping some social distancing. Are you taking out rows of seats? Are you blocking them off? So to include our university folks, can we go there? And I don't know, John from WSU, would you be willing to kick us off? And anybody else that's on the line from university, please raise your hand. John, you are muted.
Okay.
Hey.
Well, at WSU, we are currently planning to have students on campus. We're going to be starting the semester on time and then moving to online after Thanksgiving. So, and then, no discussion about what happens in the spring, whether they flip that kind of order, with the first few weeks being online and then students coming back after flu season or the peak of flu season. So that's the plan here. And of course, everything else is up in the air, like everybody else, in terms of sports and other events. And there are a couple major events on the campus that are probably be canceled. We have a big on-campus, all-campus picnic early in the fall with the student activities, sign-ups and all that sort of thing. A convocation, of course. It's doubtful that will happen live. It might happen online. But, and of course, our facilities people are working hard to figure out how to maintain sanitization of the classrooms, which classes to be online, which classes to be face-to-face. And so there's a lot of discussion about those kinds of details. The housing folks are starting to receive sign up for housing and contracts, and a lot of questions for them about what happens if all of a sudden we have to go back to online mid-semester or sooner than planned. So, and I'm sure these are details that you're all familiar with if you're in higher ed. I think everybody's struggling with the same thing. So,
what about shuttle buses? What's your plans with those?
Oh yes, we contract with Pullman Transit, and they're planning a maximum ridership on each bus of 10. Typically they would move 60 to 70 passengers per trip from the high density student areas, and they're going to be maxing out at 10. So we're looking at shortening the routes, and the buses would kind of, instead of circulating around the campus, they would come to the campus edge or just inside the edge, and then make the return trip back to what we call apartment land. And that's going to be quite a change for folks. And we expect that we're trying to encourage people to bring bikes, because we think that's going to be a good alternative for them when the weather's good. But we fully expect that we may be seeing higher demand for parking from students, which typically they're the ones that are more inclined to use the alternatives. We had a request from a landlord who is developing a new apartment complex to try to incent their people to rent by paying for parking permit, by buying them parking permits. Because what they're hearing is that students don't want to ride the bus. They want to find another way to campus. So that's what's happening here.
Okay. Do we have any other universities with their hand up, Justin?
No universities, but Vanessa Solesbee wants to add something into about the shuttle system. So Vanessa, you're unmuted.
There we go. Hi, everyone. Yeah, definitely not a university, but I'm Vanessa Solesbee, Parking and Transit Manager with the Town of Estes Park, and we started our shuttle service last week. We serve over 50 stops throughout town, and some of the public health mitigation measures that we implemented, we're doing daily health checks, temperature screenings, et cetera, for our drivers. We have created and installed our own driver protection shields. We are running at 50% of seated capacity. And we do have a little flexibility if we have a group, it's a family traveling together, and they can kind of cluster in the back of our vehicle. And we also are requiring face coverings for both our drivers and our passengers. And to ease any conflicts, we've been providing really fun branded face coverings for those who may show up without them. And then we have invested in extensive cleaning mechanisms and protocols. So we're fogging our buses multiple times a day, and our ridership, we'll see how the data shakes out, based on the limited capacity, but we had folks lining up to ride on the very first day of service. And we have a choice rider system. Mostly it's folks that are tourists or, just riding for fun, because we do have some fun trolley vehicles. But we'll see how that sort of rider dynamic impacts the usage of our vehicles this year. So we are really trying to make significant investments up front in public health mitigation to keep our buses running. And while we did had to delay the start of our service pretty significantly, we were supposed to start in May, and we just started next week and will run through September. I just got off a call with transit agencies from across the state of Colorado, and about 50% of those agencies are reporting ridership loss or decreases of between 45 and 60%. So the state of Colorado is being hit pretty hard, even though services in some areas are still running. So thanks for letting me share.
Thank you, Vanessa. Justin, did we have any more comments from universities or hands up?
No, a lot of the universities in chat, they were talking about when they were starting their semesters. Most of them looks like they're starting early and they're going to be completed by Thanksgiving. UNT is starting on time, 50% online, 50% on campus. Students will not return to campus after Thanksgiving until end of fall semester on December 11th. NAU is doing a flex model for classes, 50% or less physical in the classroom at one time. Let's see. Shawn McCormick actually posts, San Francisco cleans every bus after every run. Historical cable car systems is shut down until a vaccine is in place. 40 of our 68 lines will likely be cut permanently. Erin, I'm going to, let's see, question. Erin has a question on the fogger, and I'm going to send this directly to Vanessa Solesbee, and I'll have her follow up with you offline about that. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Yeah, I wouldn't be able to help with the fogger at all, so y'all take that offline. But Vanessa did kind of pique my interest because of her involvement with a visitation-oriented tourist destination downtown that she's in. And I had a recent conversation with Kathryn in Norwalk, up in Connecticut, and there are, and I think a lot of different cities can weigh in on the ideas of expanded seating or even street closures. So, Kathryn, if you don't mind, kind of share what's going on up in your town, and then maybe we can hear from some others on expanded seating areas and street closures.
Sure. So I'm in Norwalk, Connecticut, and I'm the Director of Transportation, Mobility, and Parking. And just really quickly, we when COVID hit, we suspended enforcement and just suspended fees altogether through the end of May. We reopened in June, and it was kind of interesting. We weren't sure how everybody was going to take it. We had revised our budget for a 25%, and we're already at through the first week in July, we're already at 56%, which was kind of surprising on our transient activity. Regarding adaptive reuse of right-of-way and on-street parking, we have two downtowns, which is connected by about 2.5 miles, so there's a whole connection there. But one of the downtown areas is the Sono area, which is more entertainment related, with a lot of restaurants and retail and mixed-use development and a lot of activity all the time. And we took out all 28 parking spaces in that area. We did not close the street, and the reason is because we have two huge mixed-use development residential areas where people have to get in and out. So on one side, we barricaded off 17 parking spaces, and we created a pedestrian way, and all of the restaurants on that side were able to come out closer to the curb. And on the other side, we created all the flexible parking, the 15-minute free parking for the curbside pickup, which has been the most viable part for the restaurant areas. They have for those restaurants that have become successful because they realize that the curbside pickup is very viable. So it's created this really cool kind of outdoor dining. The weather's really great, and curbside pickup all at the same time. So when you're sitting outside, you see people are going up and down the street. It's something that I think has been accelerated. It was going to happen anyway in the urban planning component of what we were doing in our planning of conservation and development, but it's kind of been accelerated, and I think it's here to stay. And we've gotten a lot more requests for that as well.
Great. Thank you for that input. I'm sure every city is taking a look at that and doing different things here. In Lexington, there is right now a permit in play with 2 or 3 different restaurant or bars to get a street closure done. But in a stakeholder meeting just yesterday, there was a lot of concern about safety and other things and just traffic flow, like you mentioned with that mixed use. So we're looking at that. But a question I would have, Kathryn and anyone else that's doing these expansion, are you charging for the use of those metered spaces? And if not, will that be permanently free, or do you plan to phase it in?
Well, we do have an outdoor dining permit citywide in general, and that runs from April 15th to October 15th. So no, we did not charge for a permit. We did not charge for the parking. So the impact on revenues to the parking authority was for that area only is about $50,000 during that period. However, what I said to the parking authority is, well, people that normally maybe that would park there, they're just parking elsewhere, and they're paying for parking. So
because
that's the
capacity
conversations we're having.
Right. Okay, that makes sense.
And I think it's going to be here permanently to stay. However, after October 15th, my understanding is that the barricades will come up because obviously during the fall and winter, we get snow. So it'd be difficult to deal with that. And those spaces on that one side where the outdoor dining is, not on the curbside pickup, they will go back to 2-hour paid parking.
Gotcha. So here's a philosophy we chose to go with in terms of the uses of these spaces. So we decided in Lexington with our parking authority to sort of follow the, as the reopening percentages are released, we were going to follow behind that with that percentage of charge. The theory is kind of, let's all share this burden together. So if a restaurant can seat at 33%, that was the first opening, we were still free. When they can go to 50%, then we start charging 33% of what meter bagging is. If they go to 75, we'll go to 50, and we're just going to follow behind that. And that's kind of our philosophy on sort of the shared burden of what we're all dealing with. But I really do agree with the point that if you're only sitting at 40-50% capacity, if you've got a certain block that you can't park in those meters, they're probably going to park around the block, and you don't necessarily lose that business. So I think that's where we're trying to, create a win-win situation. While we're on meters, Mike Estey.
Gary, real quickly,
yes,
David Stein from New York wanted to talk about the open restaurant program.
Oh, great.
Go ahead, David.
Thanks, Justin. Yeah, no, I just wanted to kind of highlight, when we do stuff, it's usually at a scale much larger than most other cities. There's about 26,000 restaurants in the city of New York. On June, I believe it was the second or third week of June, we launched what we call our open restaurants, which actually borrowed heavily from probably about 7-8 other cities, Los Angeles, Portland, some other cities. Our biggest thing was the permitting process is if you knew that how are you going to get that many restaurants potentially wanting to sign up for either the sidewalk, the roadway, or both, we would have to have some sort of self-certification process. And that's what it's worked all right. I mean, we're actually now in the process of using our inspectors to go to all what we think are 6,000 restaurants and make sure that they meet the safety, operational, and spatial components. But definitely a learning experience. And the most unique factor of this, New York City at the height of COVID was off about 80% of our meter revenue. And a lot of people were concerned about the loss of the parking spaces in these retail and restaurant areas. It's kind of interesting because there was no parking demand. people weren't going to these areas without the restaurants. So it's this balance, and I'd be, if anyone's interested, we're looking at that balance now of that new induced demand. We're certainly not going to get back to the pre-COVID levels, but how do we address curbside access, loading, things like double parking? That's what we're kind of in the world right now. This program was also supposed to end September 1st. The idea now is actually trying to see if we could do it year round. So things like, permanent enclosures, propane heating, which is a huge issue in some jurisdictions. How do you kind of heat these spaces or power them? But, I think I'd be happy, and, some of the stuff is public on our website, but certainly something that, we feel we were a little late to the game, but kind of have a lot to contribute to it.
David, while you're there, and I'm glad you spoke up on that because I was going to go to Mike. I'll still go to Mike, but I'm curious about the philosophies of rate increases. I know there was an announcement that you guys are doing a meter rate increase in New York. And so I want to hear the difference. Think about this, Mike, as I cue up David. But New York's looking at a rate increase. Mike, you've spent a ton of time using data to build sort of the dynamic pricing, but I think in a very realistic manner where you do it incrementally, yearly, typically. And so I heard you were going to drop to 50 cents an hour and work your way back up. So I want to hear from you about the philosophies behind that and how you think that'll work, and how do you make the announcements, because you used to just do it annually. And then David, go ahead and start just, the philosophy behind, and you started to allude to it, I think, in terms of parking demand and how the use of the curb. But if I were playing devil's advocate, is this a time to raise meter rates?
Yeah, so I spent 8 years trying to raise meter rates in New York City. It's only 2 years ago that I was able to increase the rates. New York City used to have basically two rates, Manhattan and the outer boroughs. We were actually amongst the cheapest parking if you do it per space ratio in the entire country. So smaller cities like Cincinnati, most of your cities were actually more expensive. 60,000 of our 80,000 spaces were priced at $1. That program in 2018 created a 6-tier system based upon land use, parking demand, and geography. It's modeled, I have to give Mike, we sometimes kind of complement each other. We sort of use the Seattle model of neighborhoods for demand pricing as opposed to, block by block. We don't alter the prices. And it was super successful, but politically, they did not want to increase. We use progressive pricing. So if you stay longer, it costs more. They didn't want to do that in the outer boroughs. I sort of made the case, look how successful it has been in Manhattan, where we do have the progressive pricing to encourage turnover. Our occupancy levels still stay very high. There's just so much demand that we're never it'll cost $80 to park at the curb in New York City. And politically, that's not going to fly. So this program was actually in place before COVID hit. Okay. It was on the table. And what happened is, right now in the outer boroughs, there's no rhyme or reason why we have 1 or 2 hour parking. This standardizes 2 hour parking with proportional second hour rates. And we were able to sell it is, hey, when might take longer to go to the grocery store. If you're getting a haircut, you're going to drop things off, that people are really receptive to that second hour. So they forgot that they're paying a little bit more. It became politically feasible. It's unfortunate sometimes in the media it's portrayed as being, COVID recovery. It was actually good, sound parking planning at its best. And again, I think what we're trying to do is, this is a stopgap until at some point, maybe time of day dynamic type pricing. But again, implementing that on 85,000 spaces, it's nice when you have a small area or a small geographies, but on close to 90,000 spaces, it's impossible.
Right. So, Mike, your all's philosophy on rates coming out of COVID?
Well, so in Seattle, our rates are typically between 50 cents an hour and $5 an hour, and they vary by time of day and by neighborhood. And we make adjustments. We've made adjustments on an annual basis based on on-street occupancy surveys. So since the first week of April, we've had everything shut down in support of the stay-home order here in Washington State. We are turning things back on next Monday, finally. We're going to start everywhere at 50 cents an hour in all paid areas and all times of day. And then, whereas we used to make annual rate changes, we're actually going to look at a combination of transaction data and some sampled occupancy data with the help of a consultant and use that to drive rate decisions, probably adjusting rates a couple times between now and the end of the year. So with the first rate adjustment, we might get up to a maximum of what was previously, half the prior rate or something like that. And then make another rate adjustment later in the year. And the idea is we don't know which neighborhoods are going to return at what pace. Right. And we kind of want to follow that, demand-based, data-driven system for how we adjust our rates. In terms of how we sort of engage with the community, we have a curb space access sounding board that is made up of representatives from a number of neighborhood business districts, restaurant association, have let them know and engage with them before we made the announcement that this was something we were thinking about to see if there were concerns, and they were actually anxious to get things turned on because they are seeing, all day stays in front of businesses that are now opening up. So we'll see on Monday. Again, we'll push out the 50-cent hourly rates and then look to see how things go from there.
Thank you. I'm going to stay on this topic and then we'll move back around to some transportation, but take it down to the next tier of cities. And I see Ken Smith from Omaha is on, and Tiffany Smith, if you're still on, not related with the same last names, but kind of what I would consider next tier cities. Tiffany, do you mind talking about what you all are doing regarding any thoughts on rates or enforcing meters in general coming back? I don't think Tiffany, you're breaking up really bad. Yeah, so if you don't mind, sorry about that. Couldn't hear you. Is Ken in Omaha available to talk about what you're doing in Omaha? And maybe the Midwest has a little bit of a different feel from what we've already heard from.
Well, everybody, yeah, we basically started back in June 1st with no meter operations. Up to that point, things were pretty much free and wide open. There wasn't much demand downtown. However, we had a number of protests that happened downtown, so we just kind of left it as is, and if people paid, they paid. We kept with light enforcement, just kind of hitting the safety violations up, and that was it. Mm-hmm. To this date, we're still kind of in that mode, just kind of letting things run as they are, only hitting some of the hot spots where we see some retail and restaurants kind of opening back up, and just still doing light enforcement. And we actually had one of our business organizations reach out to us and say, we want you to start enforcing meters again because we're not getting turnover. So wow. That was nice to kind of have that backing from that standpoint and be able to kind of feel wanted again within the community. So that's really how we've moved on.
Excellent. Earlier, before we started, there are some questions that came in that I thought were pretty interesting. Is a couple things related to technology changes, opportunities that we see because of COVID, and I'm sure from the vendor and supplier and even consultant world, what are budgets like in terms of capital? Is everything just cut off? We're not going to buy anything new, or do we think we're going to buy certain things because it was already in the capital plan? I'll speak to a couple of those things, and I'd love to hear from others. And this can be any university or municipal or whatever. In terms of capital, we actually have an RFP on the street right now for parks equipment. I can't get into a lot of details, obviously, because it's in play, but. I had a board meeting, a Zoom board meeting this morning, and we're at this point still pushing forward with what our CAPP budget was, capital expenditures. But to the flip side of that, we also we buy in on the ideas of touchless parking, frictionless parking. So both on street and off street, we're looking for ways to be more asset light and rely on mobile payment apps in both on-street and off-street. And in terms of the on-street meter world, we truly are looking at the opportunity to be more asset light and spread out more parking spaces per kiosk type meter. We still have single space meters in a lot of areas where that makes sense, but in the kiosk world, we're starting to. We first rolled out kiosks back in probably 08, 09. We would average about 8 per unit, and we're trying to get 16 to 20 per unit as we move around now. So I'm talking about spaces. So that's just the way we are looking at a couple of those opportunities. Does anybody have something different that you're looking at in terms of technology changes, or if anyone can answer the question about are you full speed ahead with CAPP, or is there capital expenditures or everything off the table for your next fiscal year or wherever you are in fiscal year?
This is Kathryn. No, our capital budget, not necessarily related to equipment, but we are doing substantial infrastructure improvements we have 11 facilities, and we were budgeted for those, and we're moving right ahead. We just signed a contract for on-call engineering related to those infrastructure improvements. As far as touchless payment, we have had a pay-by-cell platform for 10 years. We just implemented text to pay, and that's been well received. And online reservations at a couple of our facilities, which also has been well received. So we're kind of moving ahead on our stuff.
Great. Anyone else on new technologies or yes or no to capital?
On chat, Nicole wrote, initially most of her projects were put on hold. Some have started back up. One got canceled altogether in higher ed. Most are being very conservative and pausing.
Okay. Something related to higher ed that I think has come up, I've seen in some chats or some online questions, is about walk-in. And I think those of us in the municipal world also have, the walk-in concerns where people might in the past have come in to make a payment. But I'd be curious to start with the university world. And actually, it'll go back to the previous question. Can you use this situation to drive more and more to virtual permits, more and more online payments? I know those long lines at universities, parking organizations is typically a thing of the past, but some of you may still be in that world. Is anybody looking to use this to change that? And then if you're always just going to have some level of walk-in, what are you doing to both protect your staff and or the visitors that are coming in?
So our university is pursuing an app that departments can take advantage of in different ways. I won't share the name of it just to keep it clean. So we have the option of either, kind of like when you go to get your hair cut, you jump on the app, you put yourself on the wait list. So you can either do it as a wait list or as scheduling an actual appointment to help manage. And we're going to have notifications at the front of the building letting folks know that's how you get kind of on the line, is to use that app. We do kind of have behind the scenes a plan, because we do have, kind of our older city community, our Flagstaff community members that will come in every so often, and we don't want to throw them off asking them to use technology that they may not be comfortable with. And so we will have a full-time staff member kind of behind the scenes helping those folks. But for the most part, they're going to push out a huge tool for all the, many departments across the campus for the whole university, that's the way that they get service. We're also really just trying to push students that you don't need to come in for a permit. Everything has been online for years. And I understand that some people just want that physical face-to-face contact to feel secure, but I'm hoping, given the current situation, they'll feel more secure doing it virtually.
Thanks, Erin. Appreciate it. Anyone else? Comments from the university world?
Here's a comment in the chat. Actually, there's two. The first one's from Tiff. First one's from Tiffany Smith. We are doing walk-ins with social distancing, both in our office and for off-street and on-street payments. We're using plexiglass and markings for social distancing. Anthony Rock wrote, we have gone 100% online with our contract/vendor permits for the first time for the University of Vermont. And that's all the answers there.
No problem. So I've got a couple other thoughts that I want to throw out there, and I would love to hear if any of our consultants, suppliers, vendors that are on, if any of the topics that we've already brought up, if you're aware of some of your customers, what they're doing, something that you could share with the group that would be beneficial to the group without being a sales pitch, please raise your hand and let Jess know that you have something to share. I want to think a little bit more about enforcement in terms of booting, and then I want to talk about scooters. So, and I think the scooter topic can land at both university and municipal settings. But in terms of booting, immobilization, or even towing in a lot of cases, I saw, and I think in one of our previous shop talks like this, we talked about, is there a soft way to phase those types of measures back in, even to the point of collections, or do you just pick a date and start hitting the ground and run with it? Here at the Parking Authority in Lexington, we've tried really hard to be, for the most part, stick to things that make logical sense, and sometimes we've changed. We are not a city department, so we have a little bit of flexibility over some true city departments who might even have to get an ordinance change or something like that. We can set up some policies. So in terms of immobilization, we stopped immediately in mid-March, early March, maybe the 13th. And we started back right after the 4th of July weekend. So this week is our first week back to immobilizations. And what we've done different is we've allowed payment plans to be set up. And we try to set up some criteria so that it's just not real willy-nilly. And we're not saying that we'll always do payment plans, but at least during this, what we might say, if we're still in what might be considered a pandemic, we're going to allow payment plans on an immobilization. Here, with our lower rates than some of the bigger cities, someone who gets a mobilization device put on might owe anywhere from as low as maybe $120 or so. A lot of them are in the $280 range to $500–600. So those are the kind of ranges. And so our thinking, and it really came from our board level, in terms of payment plans, was, we very well may be putting a device on someone who's unemployed or struggling, even if they are. And so setting up payment plans. So we decided that we would work out their amount over a 6-month period, if that's the way it worked, with the device removal fee paid up front, and then basically making payments on whatever the citations were. So that's kind of what we did. I'd be curious to hear from anyone else regarding how or have you moved back into either immobilization, booting, towing, or any of the sort of enforcement techniques.
Hey, Gary, this is Cynthia with City of Houston.
Hey, Cynthia.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
We are considering payment plan, but our director, Maria Ershad, hasn't, I think she hasn't presented it to City Council yet, but that is one of the options that we were considering to do. And there's been talk about it, but we haven't moved forward yet with it. But it's just in the preliminary discussions right now. But with the thought, like you said, people unemployed, the impact, the devastation of our economy, to do something to help out. So my question to you is, how are y'all going to keep up with the payment plan? Are y'all doing something automated, or y'all doing something manually? Is it a combination of both? That's what my question is to you. So I'm going to go ahead and mute now.
Oh, thank you, Cynthia. Good to hear from Houston. Tell Maria hi. We set this up, and it's a great question, because that was our question, and probably the reason why most people don't do payment plans is they're difficult to manage, they're difficult to keep up with. So we're using the same database. We are a T2 customer, and we're using that same database to set up our plans and make payments. And we had to do it really quickly, so we did some testing. Not positive we'll be happy that we went down that, nothing against the software, but just, how skilled are we at checking back in? Did that payment happen when it was supposed to happen? What do you do? We are asking the person to sign an agreement that they know they could be re-immobilized if they miss a payment. So putting a little teeth in it, but trying to be gracious as much as we can. Great question, and it's not easy to do that. But obviously you need to know that before you approach council and be able to answer those questions of how that's going to be managed. And in an effort to try to be, it kind of reminds me of our Food for Fines program, and a lot of you all rolled out things like that. It's, on one hand, you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. You're trying to be nice, but then you can end up opening a can of worms. And so I understand that. It's a great question. Anybody else have input on booting, towing measures that you're taking? Are you not doing it at all? Can hold off?
Shawn, go ahead. You're unmuted.
Thanks, Justin. Yeah, Shawn McCormick in San Francisco. So we suspended booting and towing for outstanding citations for vehicle registration, for abandoned vehicles on the street, for virtually everything we suspended towing for. We haven't restarted any of it at this time. We're looking to restart vehicle registration enforcement in a couple of weeks, as soon as we can open up our service center to be able to accept cash payments, because right now we're required by state law to accept cash payments. So we have no option to do that, and we're also required to offer payment programs. So it's mandated by the state. So we're pretty fluent in payment plans and processing those and rebooting people after the fact. We're really seriously considering whether or not we will ever return to booting. It's something that may go away. We may not return to impounding vehicles for staying on the street for abandoned or 72 hours. Is there the limit in California? So we're looking at possibly eliminating that completely, but there's going to be a lot of pushback from the public. Mm-hmm. But it is an extremely expensive program.
Shawn, do you guys have a homeless scenario where there's a lot of people living in vehicles that might be parked places? Is that something you all deal with there?
San Francisco doesn't have a homeless problem.
That's right. I forgot. Wrong city.
Yeah. We have a lot of people living in vehicles. We have a lot of people living in tents. I mean, we literally just spent the last month putting 520 something people out of tents and into hotel rooms, just to get them off the street. Mm-hmm. But we're still dealing with a couple of lawsuits regarding towing people for outstanding tickets, and it's an unlawful violation of the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution. And mm-hmm. So we're still fighting through that, and so those are all things on the plate. So this has caused us to sort of relook at what is absolutely essential. There's a lot of cars on the street that shouldn't be on the street right now, because normally they would have been removed. But we'll have to look at potentially taking those cars off the street for a different reason that we're willing to do, even though, it's frustrating. It's going to be frustrating for the public, but I'm not sure that there's political will to eliminate some of those altogether.
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you. Please, any of the vendor, supplier, consultants that are familiar with some of the questions that we've thrown out there, some of you all work with way more clients than I know of, so you might be able to lend to any of these previous topics, and then I'll try to move back around to something a little transportation oriented.
While we're waiting for them, let me just go over a few comments that came up through the chat here. Tom Wozniak wrote, the city of Milwaukee continues to have municipal related towing suspended, except for the safety related violations and scenario in which vehicles absolutely need to be moved. Erin Stam wrote, we often work with students if the amount owed when booting is higher and allowed to be paid over time if posted to their university account.
Okay, thank you. So one of the things that I've been thinking about is scooters, and I think it affects both. And the reason why it's kind of it might seem like a silly topic, considering all that we all are dealing with. And by the way, thank you so much for being on this call. I know you're busy, and in a lot of ways we're all tired. We've had lots of different kinds of conversations than we've ever had in our whole careers. But scooters is an interesting thing. Here in Lexington, we had just rolled out a pretty good permit that allowed for even our organization to cite for improper parking or leaving scooters in the wrong place for too long of a time. It was a really good program, but it just rolled out right before winter hit. Then we had winter, and then we had COVID, basically. So I don't really know what a long-term effect will be, but I did notice, just because I'm close, University of Kentucky is just down the street, that they are encouraging scooter use. They have a cooperation kind of an agreement with one particular vendor, but they want to encourage that as a mode of transportation that's safe. I'm not really sure what sort of cleaning procedures, but maybe it's a way to still say, don't bring your vehicle to campus, but if you're nervous about riding a bus or a shuttle, please take scooters. But I just wonder both, not to pick on you again, Mike, but I know you guys have done a lot of extensive scooter work. I don't know what the latest is there. No, you're out, you kicked them out. No scooters in Seattle?
Not yet.
Okay.
Our pilot has been delayed several times. Yeah.
Okay. So you had the pilot and then it ended, and so nobody's allowed to operate right now. Is that currently?
We've only had bike share. We still haven't had scooters in Seattle. We have still held them at bay.
Gotcha.
We had a pilot plan for the spring, but
Right. Okay.
has not hit the ground yet.
Okay. But how about universities? Are you all thinking about using scooters as a tool, as an alternative, like promoting it? Because I felt like in the beginning we were all sort of felt adversarial towards them, but could it also be a tool that we would embrace in the university environment? We're all just thumbs down to scooters, I guess. No comments. All right, please, vendor suppliers, you're all sitting there just being quiet. Consultants, Casey, you're my buddy. Certainly you have something to say about something that we've said. Thank you all for being so respectful, but your voices are super important. I see Kevin White as well. I know Brett Wood's on this. You guys are all working with and talking to different people. What are you hearing out there, Casey?
Well, thanks, Gary, for facilitating. And in my Zoom box, you're right next to mine, and I confuse you with me all the time. So you're just the better looking of the two of us. I guess this is slightly off topic, and Gary, if you want to, run with this, great. But we have a number of, you were talking about capital projects that were being delayed, and I wanted to, take a little bit of a detour on that, but talk about operational studies that we were in the middle of, or starting just when COVID hit, and a lot, just like capital projects, a lot of those got suspended pretty quickly. But since then, and I know that there are other consultants on the call, some of those projects and parts of them have moved forward, which is sort of interesting, right? Any of them that had anything to do with future development, that planning that was going on, or utilization studies and supply and demand, I think obviously our clients are concerned about their budgets, but they also understand that at some point things are going to move ahead. So what can be done now and remotely in some cases? So we've seen a little bit of that kind of carry on. And so I just wanted to mention that as one of the things that, trying to figure out what can be done, or what's most important, or what can sustain, a project so that the momentum that might have been built before can continue is something that we're working with our clients on. And so that was just one thing to throw out there, that not everything has to stop, and there will be something that comes after all of this. And I think of all of you in the municipal side and university side that are so focused on, like day-to-day stuff, right? Getting your head around longer term, is a difficult thing to do. But I just wanted to throw that out there. And again, thank you for facilitating.
Thanks, Casey. And I'll want to hear from Brett and Kevin, also Kevin White. So get you guys unmuted. But from what I understood in some of the consultant world is there was a bit of a backlog, and that has kind of sustained work, but maybe new work is looking a little thinner. But I think Casey was alluding to certain types of work continues, certain types of thought process. And I think I would imagine that in the future, for everyone who works with their customers, no matter what it is that you bring to the table, helping customers find ways to save on expenses and obviously revenue generation I would think would be things that everybody can help bring to the table. Kevin, you want to go next? Things that you're seeing out there?
Yeah, I guess I would just reiterate your discussion earlier about asset light. We're seeing a lot of questions about that. I think it's a potential cost saving measure, as you indicated, and I think there's just more and more interest in looking at ways that we can eliminate, single space meters in particular, go to the kiosk approach, go to the pay by cell approach. So I would just be curious if other operators like yourself, like you talked about earlier, are getting those types of questions as well.
Okay. We'll come back to that. Brett, what kind of input can you lend our way, Brett Wood?
Hey, Gary, and thanks for calling me after Casey and Kevin. They pretty much covered everything, so I don't have anything left to say. No,
I was going by the amount of hair. So Casey and I went first.
Well, are we talking about top hair or beard hair? Because Kevin comes in pretty heavy. But,
yeah, he does. Got that COVID beard going on.
It's interesting because one of the things I'm seeing, like the size and scale of projects are getting scaled a little bit, right? Because we just have to conserve the dollars that we have. And everybody on the municipal and university side are dealing with revenue crunches. But to your point, one of the things we're seeing is in lieu of it being a study about what the future of transportation looks like, or how do we strategically look at the next 10 years, it's how do we begin to monetize different things that are not monetized now? How do we leverage new revenue streams? How do we recover revenue? Because that's what gets us all back on the path to normal. Mm-hmm. We all realize that we're not going to recapture what we lost from March to June. But if we can find new ways to create revenue streams, I think that's where we're going to be. So we're seeing a lot of projects that are coming out that are a little smaller in nature, but they're looking at how do we implement paid parking? How do we adjust our paid parking? How do we do dynamic pricing? How do we monetize loading? How do we monetize pickup, drop off, those types of things in an efficient manner? And they're not new conversations. We've been having them even before COVID, but they're gaining more importance. And I think there's some momentum to be able to get regulatory change and administrative change where we may not have been able to get that before. The other thing, and I hope all, who have been involved have seen this, but we've been putting out, the research committee and IPMI have been putting out some roadmap to recovery type stuff. And I first, thanks to everybody that's on this call who have been a part of the previous calls that led to a lot of the information that went into those. And there's more coming. We're going to do an academic one in August. It's going to talk a little more about campuses and what people are seeing. And if you haven't seen the magazine this month, there's a link to a survey. One of the things we want to do is start surveying municipalities about what recovery is looking like. What are some of the trends that you're seeing from a revenue standpoint? What are some of the topic areas that you're seeing as being very successful in supporting the community, whether that's things like streeteries, or it's slow streets, or it's using parking as another source of support for business. And we're going to follow up with that in September. So there's quite a bit coming out from the recovery side. So please stay engaged and take the survey if you can, and help us get some information to share with the group.
Thank you. We don't have a whole lot of time left. Justin, do we want more in?
I have one comment here from David Lieb from Walker Consultants. From a consultant view, we are working with universities on converting their programs from annual, monthly, semester passes to daily parking programs. We find that the initiative is coming from customer demand versus sustainability departments for the first time. Are there any other campuses on this webinar hearing similar things? And then one more consultant, we have Mark Cohen from Green Screen. We have multiple projects on hold throughout the Southwest and Mid-Atlantic and continue to move forward. For example, Dulles Discovery Parking Garage, also social distancing. We've originally working from a San Francisco project for Uber and Lyft as relates to safety, waiting passengers. And now it has become social distancing related, as well as green screen planters.
Very nice. Hey, I'm glad that people were active in the chat, which is usually where I'm hanging out, and I haven't been able to pay attention to what all's going on. So hopefully it's been valuable. I will start to wrap it up, but please throw off another question if anybody's got anything. Hopefully this has been beneficial, and even for IPMI's standpoint, we appreciate everyone being on, but if there's things that we could do to make this better, hopefully there's been some takeaways or try to mix it up a little bit. Yeah, please throw off a couple more questions if you've got something. And if somebody, we still got a little bit of time. So if somebody has been sitting on it and you want to ask or comment, please raise your hand and Justin can pull you in. We still got a few minutes.
All right, I'm going to read one last comment while we have time here. Todd Albert just wrote, from a vendor viewpoint, we've remained strong in new construction projects, but municipalities and university projects have slowed. Overall, there is an increase in interest around gateless and frictionless systems. So with that being said, I'm going to give Gary one last opportunity to have any closing comments, and then we will close up here.
Thank you, IPMI. Thanks, Justin. You've been doing great trying to corral what all's going on behind the scenes. One of the topics that I did want to get into, but feels like it could get into the weeds, is just budgeting and strategies towards budgeting. We were able to prolong our budget process. So we're in our new fiscal year. Most people that are in a governmental capacity typically are July 1 through June 30, but I know there's some different fiscal years out there. But we just, as I mentioned earlier, we had our Zoom board meeting and approved our operational budget for this next year just now. We usually are doing that in February or March, but the board gave us a lot of leeway to try to monitor the situation, see where we're going. And I know I talked on one of these other ones, I think Dave Honorado was throwing out from Pittsburgh, that they had just kind of a plan to phase in where it's, we're going to guess that we'll be at 25% in July, maybe 30% in August. And, I think generally across the board, we're all hoping that things are back to normal more so in January. I think a vaccination is probably really key. I see some people nodding heads that will help us feel a little more comfortable. In our world, events, we have a garage that's right next to Rupp Arena where the Kentucky Wildcats play and a lot of big concerts. It's about 22,000 seat. And then we have a really small opera house. So this garage typically will generate about $200,000 a year. In event parking, we got a big zero in our budget because we're just not sure. We're not sure what's going to happen this coming year. We hope that maybe January, February, March, things like that start happening. So just something to think about. I know we don't have a lot of time for the discussion, but that was something that I kind of would hope to get into. And if anybody wants to email me or shoot me some info of what you're thinking about, or you want to take this offline and have a chat about it, let's do it. We can all learn from each other. I appreciate everybody's input. Thanks so much for being on this. And that's all I've got.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Gary, thank you very much for the time that you spent here today, and thank you for everyone who have participated. I want to say, if you do want to continue this conversation, you can definitely continue it on IPMI's forum at forum.parking-mobility.org. And then also wanted to let everyone know about our next Shop Talk on August 5th at 2 p.m., Planning for What's Next, a Roadmap to Recovery. Also want to mention about our Stay Connected page. We invite everyone to visit our Stay Connected page. Our community has a long history of being resourceful and helpful during both good times and difficult times. Thank you for your membership, your support, and your willingness to jump in and connect, your dedication to our industry. Also, switching gear, a few upcoming events that we have. In next Wednesday, we have our IPMI Wicked problem-solving class. Facing a complex challenge or with no obvious answer, that is what a wicked problem is. And IPMI's new instructor-led course will help you solve those problems. Spaces is limited, and please register today. And join us for IPMI's July webinar hosted by Benito Perez and Evian Patterson, sharing best practices on how to engage the industry in a dialogue on municipal curbside management. We hope to see you there. Again, thank you for everyone who attended today. Today's Shop Talk is copyrighted in 2020 by the International Parking and Mobility Institute with all rights reserved. You may now disconnect. Thank you.
See you guys.
Thanks, so.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.